Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Awesome. Okay. Thank you again for joining us today for our webinar. And what I'd like to do, my name is Natalie Roberts, and I'm with Scrum Training Institute. And we're so thrilled to welcome Fabian Schwartz today for our presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to him in just a moment. Before we get started, just to give you guys a little bit of sense of the logistics. We are recording this webinar. So you and anyone who did register will receive a recording of the presentation. And in addition to that, we would ask if you guys wouldn't mind staying on mute for the presentation and utilizing your chat window for any questions that you may have. We'll definitely allow some time at the end for those questions. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Fabian. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Welcome, everyone. I think I jump straight in. I will share my screen here. Okay. So the title of this talk is Scrum in Challenging Times, obviously referring to the current situation, COVID. And I think especially in the beginning of this crisis, for many people, that was only a public health situation. And I think latest by now, most realized that's actually a two-way problem. One is public health and the other is the effect on the economy. And usually stuff that you do on one end somehow can affect the other end. So my name is Fabian Schwartz. I'm a native German and I have more than 20 years experience working in projects and technology, and lately a lot in Scrum. I initially started working and helping clients in Germany. From there I moved to Australia and I'm now active in the Americas. I'm right now located in Bogota, Colombia, but I've been working from Canada down to Argentina. In terms of Scrum, I've trained more than 30,000 people. I think by now it should be almost 40,000 if I'm not wrong. But if you want to know more about me and my background, I invite you to connect on LinkedIn, Fabian Schwartz on LinkedIn, and we have lots of more information about me. Now, for this talk, I would like to talk a little about what we can do to improve our situation in this crisis. However, before I would like to explain a little bit how was the situation before the crisis, because now in the crisis everybody is talking about COVID as a trigger for digital transformation and everything is changing because of COVID, which partially is true, but lots of that we already have seen before. So COVID is just one part of the ever-changing situation we are in. And so that's what I want to talk first. How was the situation before the crisis? Then what's going on during the crisis right now? And a possible solution, which is in this case, Scrum. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the environment before the crisis. Now, before the crisis, there are several buzzwords that you might have heard, like Industry 4.0, big data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and stuff like that, which are all more or less connected. And all these, what we call usually Industry 4.0, already had a major effect on change and basically accelerating change and making it necessary to change business models, or actually increasing uncertainty, and with that making it necessary to change business models. So if you want to have some examples, you can, for example, see here that we had initially photography that moved to digital photography, and now basically all at least non-professional equipment is usually replaced by cell phone photography or mobile phone photography. Okay, CD moved to MP3, now to streaming, DVD and television moved to streaming. The taxi cab industry is replaced by Uber and car sharing. Newspapers move to the internet. Banks are threatened by fintechs. Books are replaced by e-books. So that's something that's happening or was already happening long before COVID affected us. And what we see here is that usually they came new products that were cheaper than they were before, or somebody now has access to a product that didn't have access before, or now we have a product that's basically just better and cheaper than before. Okay, so that one of the three factors that were affected by Industry 4.0, and those for sure affected business models. So to give you an example, this here is a former CEO from Fujifilm, and he said, imagine Toyota would have to survive in a world where nobody buys cars, basically referring to the situation Fujifilm was in. If you remember, Fujifilm was basically producing film for photography. Now the problem was there was a transformation or transition, and film was replaced by digital photography. Fuji managed to completely change their business model and replace their film business by basically producing digital cameras. Now they were affected by a second problem, because now the hardware and cell phones became so good that now most of the non-professional photo equipment is replaced by your cell phone, because they now have cameras that are so good that you don't need to carry around a digital camera. So now Fuji again reinvented themselves, and now they actually produce different stuff, materials for LCD screens, medical technology, industrial radiography, and cinema technology. And this is something that happens in a very few years. So in very few years, they actually had to reinvent their company twice. And other companies didn't make it. So if you look at Kodak, for example, or Blockbuster, there are lots of companies that were affected by this Industry 4.0 transition that didn't survive. So what I want to say with this is, it's not COVID alone that creates such a high uncertainty environment. We already had a fast changing high uncertainty environment long before COVID actually appeared. So let's talk a little bit about COVID. So COVID obviously exponentially increased this problem. So on one side, we have the real health issue, which is the COVID-19 virus that caused lots of stuff, primary lockdowns and social distancing. But we also see the highest unemployment rates. If you take the US since 2008, I'm right now in Colombia, we're way worse, and we have probably the highest unemployment rate in the century, if I'm not wrong. We have the lowest oil prices since decades. And all of that actually affects us in a way we might not directly see. Okay, so if you look at COVID numbers, maybe by now many people are bored of looking at these statistics. They're basically increasing all the time. When I gave a similar talk a few months ago, we had on the red number that's now on almost 30 million. We had here 5 million. So this is increasing. But beside of the health issue, but states usually react, right? So in many states, we are in a mandatory quarantine or lockdown, or at least in a, for example, Mexico, many people are in a lockdown they decided to, so they decided to stay at home. Okay, but in whatever case, we have now lots of people that are working remote that didn't work remote before. Okay, so this causes a problem, particularly for businesses that are not suitable for working remote. So for example, in Colombia here, we have now thousands of restaurants closing down because of the mandatory lockdown situation where they can't operate. They just recently get partially, after 6 months, a permit to start operating again. You can imagine 6 months without cash flow, many companies just go broke or bankrupt. And there are lots of thousands of more companies that are affected by that all around the world. And one side effect of that is that the unemployment rate increases. Okay. So this is the US unemployment rate. Looks like we are getting a little bit, or we're improving a little bit compared to a few weeks ago. But still, it's the highest unemployment rate since 2008. And many financial analysts actually believe that we are in a bubble, which, if you look at the stock market. No? So, for example, I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk, but if you look at prices of Tesla shares, or the market cap of Tesla, which is basically higher than any other car company or many other car companies combined, but only produces a fraction of the cars that they actually produce and sell, you can easily see that there's at least a risk for a bubble, without saying we are in a bubble, but there's a risk for being in a bubble. And if that bubble bursts, then those numbers here will go up even further. So what's the problem? Well, the state needs money for to pay, for example, those unemployment, or to stimulate the economy to handle this unemployment stuff. Now, another problem are oil prices. Okay, so we have the lowest oil prices in decades. In the US alone, there's 1.5 million jobs in 2019. It was tied to the oil industry. Now, the problem is we're also close to storage capacity for oil, which can lead to negative oil prices, which we've actually seen a couple of days during the last months, and the risk of the oil price plummeting, plummeting. So especially when the economy is going down, there's a tendency to consume less oil, which basically, or again, leads to more businesses closing and more unemployment, which is then a vicious cycle if you want. Okay, so what's going to happen? What's already happening? So one of the major things that usually happen in this situation is a reduction of flow of capital, and that's why governments usually try to put as much money as they can into the company, into the economy. But what is also happening is an exponential increase in uncertainty in what's going to happen in the economy with all these regulations that change here, for example, on a daily basis. So businesses will have to change their business model. Usually they will also have to try to automate processes and lower their cost, which at the end means many businesses will have to digitalize or disappear, which we call digital transformation. Right? So right now, COVID is the strongest driver of digital transformation. And here we have teams working remotely, something that will be interesting a little bit further down the road in this talk. So summing that all up, like if you want to ignore the data, the issue is we had a high uncertainty environment before the crisis, and now we have even more uncertainty during this crisis. And it's still not really clear where the way is going, where we're headed. Okay. So what's a possible solution for that problem? Scrum. Now what's Scrum? Scrum is a framework of a way of working. And Scrum can do several things in this situation. First of all, it can reduce uncertainty. Okay. Second, it is an essential framework in digital transformations. And third, you can use Scrum actually to create high-performance remote teams. So this is what I want to talk about now in this part of the presentation. Okay. So Scrum is based on the Scrum Guide. Okay. So there's an official Scrum Guide published by Dr. Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, first published in 2010. The last version came out in 2017, and we're expecting to have a new version very soon. So this is a very, very short document that tells you how Scrum works, that tells you what you have to do in order for Scrum to work. And what you see here is actually the front page of the Scrum Guide. And as you can see, it says the Scrum Guide, the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game. Okay, and I always found that interesting. It says the rules of the game, because like, we are working now for many years with Scrum. And in the beginning, in the company, they told me, or they recommended me, I should write a book about Scrum. But my team was actually interested in that book for marketing reasons. So they thought it would be great to tell our clients that we have a book. And I always said, no, I'm not going to write a book, because we have the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Guide is very clear on what you have to do. So why would I confuse people further writing anything additionally, besides the fact there are also lots of books out there, right? But working with our clients through the years, we realized the following thing. Rarely clients ask us what they have to do, because the guide actually tells you exactly what you have to do. What they ask us is, how am I going to do that? And that was when we realized, oh wait, there might be a lack of information out there. Because if you think about that, imagine you want to play chess. And the only thing you know are the rules of the game. Well, ask yourself, what's the probability to win a game? It's probably pretty low, right? Because if the only thing you know are the rules, then your chances of winning are low. What you need to win in any sports beside the rules are strategies, which in sports usually we call plays, right? So in sports you have a playbook. So that was when we realized, well, there's a need in the market. People want to know how they are going to do that. What are the strategies they can use to apply Scrum? And that was when I started to realize, well, maybe we should write a book. Maybe I should write a book. And then it took several years to put together all our case studies, all our client experiences, to finally get to this book, which you can see here, your Scrum Playbook. It's Poker, Not Chess. I'm going to put the link to Amazon here in the chat in case you're interested. And this is a very beginner's book, so it's not technical language. This is very practical, very like has lots of case studies and practical examples to it. And the idea is that you have the guide that tells you what to do. You can actually download the guide for free. And if you want to know how to do it, I would recommend the book. But for this talk, I want to explain a little bit in general how Scrum can help us to reduce uncertainty. Okay. So let me take out the pointer here. So what we do in traditional project management is we're at the beginning of the project. We have a very big goal over here, and we build a plan how we get from here to here. Then we go a year and work on that plan. And when we finish, we have this big thing ready and we hand it over to the client. The only thing is, during that year, so many things have changed that on many occasions the client doesn't like what we delivered here, or his need has changed. So what we delivered doesn't serve his need anymore. So what Scrum does is this. Scrum works in iterations, short cycles, short intervals. So at the beginning, you do the same. You point to this big goal, and this gray area here is the uncertainty. So that means you can go any way. We don't know where it goes from. There's lots of uncertainty. But what you do now is you don't try to deliver the whole thing at once. You just break it down into smaller pieces, and you deliver one small thing until the end of the first interval. Now, here you talk to the client and ask him for feedback. And the client might say, well, I don't like it. You have to change this. I don't need this. I need now something else, etc. But since you're at the beginning of the project, you can adjust. So now you might point at this overall goal, but you have reduced uncertainty a little bit. And that way you continue. You work on the next iteration, on the next iteration, next iteration. And over time, you have always a bigger and bigger and bigger increment. And you might have changed the overall end result, but now you're sure that what you deliver is actually what the client needs. So second, Scrum is usually very helpful during digital transformations. So what you see here on the right is a digital transformation framework, which talks about the business model, the new business model you need, the customers and channels you have, operations, and what usually you have on a horizontal level during a digital transformation is an agile transformation. And that's where Scrum comes into place. So what Scrum does here is, first of all, it focuses on generating customer value. Okay. Second, Scrum ensures frequent feedback, something that helps me to always stay close to what the customer actually needs. And third, Scrum quickly adapts to business changes. So for example, if what happened during the COVID crisis is many companies had to change their business model to react, and Scrum helps me to really adapt very fast. For example, our own company works fully with Scrum. Now, what we never ever gave any virtual class before the COVID crisis. So every class was face-to-face all over the world. Now we had to adjust because I basically from day one was locked down in Colombia, was prohibited to leave and fly. So I couldn't do any trainings even if I wanted to, not even in a country where it was allowed because I couldn't get there. So we had to move the whole business model from being a face-to-face operating business into a virtual business, and we did that within a week. How? We're basically using Scrum. Oh, sorry. We go back. And fourth, and that's a very important point, Scrum can help you with your cultural change. So what's the idea here? Well, at the end in a transformation, what you want is to change your culture, which is very difficult. And usually people try first to affect the values, which is the deepest part of the culture. But there's also a part in your culture which is your behavior. And you can change behavior a lot easier than you can change values. So if you start with Scrum, you can start with the behavioral change first, and with time that can become, or that can also help you to change your values. Now, let me talk a little bit about high performance teams with Scrum, particularly in remote teams. Okay, so I have developed a model that was long before the crisis, which is called the high performance engagement model, or HPCM model, which has 6 dimensions that you need for a team to become a high-performing team. Okay, and so I'm just going to name them a little quick, and then I'm going to enter on each one of them and look at how Scrum can help us with that in remote teams. So teams need a purpose in order to know where they're heading. Then they need to focus on this purpose. Inside the team, we need trust, but more than trust, we also need psychological safety, which has become kind of a hype in the last few years, basically referring to how secure do I feel in my team of admitting a mistake or making a mistake or taking a risk, if you want. And we want teams to be cross-functional or multifunctional in order to have everybody on the team that we need to produce something end-to-end. And we need shared consciousness. Okay. So what do we need purpose for, and how do we create purpose with Scrum? So purpose in remote teams is really important because you basically have less control over what's going on. And if you try to keep control up, you will basically occupy your team with meetings after meetings after meetings and reports after reports after reports. So they will actually have less time to work on the real product. So we try to guide our teams by giving them a purpose that they can believe in. Now in Scrum, there's a role called the product owner, and that's just the visionary person that we want to giving the team a purpose. So the idea is that this product owner is capable of selling this vision to the team, so the team believes in that vision. I put Steve Jobs up here because, like, for most people, he's a visionary, was a visionary person. But so the product owner doesn't have to be Steve Jobs, but he has to be capable of having and creating a vision and articulate the vision in a way that the whole team can understand that. If you want to know more in the book, I talk a little bit more about that. So second, we want those teams to solve difficult problems together. Okay, so the example I put up here is an example from the US Navy. The reason I do that is because usually in special forces, you have a team, and the team members see each other almost like a family. Like many occasions, they would actually take a bullet for their teammates. Okay, now I'm not suggesting that you do that in your workplace, but it's interesting how those special forces get into the situation that they actually would do that. Now, if you look at the Navy SEALs, they have a trainings program which is called the BUTS program, and phase 1 is basically 8 weeks of physical conditioning. Okay. Now, more or less around week 4, there's something which is called Hell Week, which is 5.5 days of continuous training with around 4 hours of total sleep, not per day, during the whole week. And there they have to do lots of very difficult, physically exhausting training. Okay. Now, this experience they have together cause that they see each other as a family, that they create this sense of a team. And many call this a boot camp, and many companies actually have at the beginning, when you start working there, something like a boot camp trying to replicate this idea. The whole idea is here that they solve together difficult problems. So that's what you want in your team. So instead of trying to break up the tasks into very small chunks that you can give each person, and then they go off and do that alone and then turn that in, you actually want several of them being connected and trying to work on a bigger problem to create these team sense. Okay. Another thing that's important is that the team is cross-functional, also something coming from special forces. So many call this T-shaped people. So for example, if I am an UX expert and I'm on the team, and there's also a software development, Java developer expert on the team, this is my expertise. So this is the vertical part of the T. Okay. So if I was a UX expert yesterday, but I'm very likely to be an UX expert tomorrow. But what we also want is some general knowledge of all the other areas, which is the horizontal part of the T. For example, if I'm UX, well, I should have some basic knowledge of what the Java programmer is doing. If I'm a tester, I should have some basic knowledge of what the documenter is doing, etc. In order to, when somebody is a bottleneck, that we can help him. And if I'm the bottleneck, I can ask for help. And if I have free time, I can offer help. All this helps to create a flow. So everything that enters into the team in terms of work requests flows through the team without bottlenecks and without people having too much free time. Now, Scrum also helps us to create collective awareness. So how does that work, and what I mean by that? I don't know if you've ever looked at ants. That is kind of interesting. Like, it seems that they're all synchronized. They all know exactly what their role is in all this group of thousands of ants. But there's no project manager ant or manager of operations ant or CEO ant. Somehow they all know what their role is, and the series that is all through collective awareness, is a collective consciousness. So let me give you an example. One of my friends works in Germany in one of the major car producers of Germany. And the plant he works in produces brakes for one of the cars. Now, this plant in particular had some performance problems, so they contracted consultants in order to figure out what's going on and what they can do. So one of the first things the consultants were doing was asking them, well, what are you doing here? And people were looking at them and saying, well, are you crazy? What kind of a stupid question is that? We are producing brakes. So they did some more stuff to analyze some more, and they defined some measures they want to take. One of them was bringing the whole team to the principal plant, to the major plant, and showed them the car that actually uses the brake. So they showed them the car and they said, okay, look, this is the car. You produce the brakes for this car. Now, those brakes are an essential part of this car. Without those brakes, this car is absolutely useless. They did obviously some more stuff, but this is one of the major things. And when they get back, they start working again, and actually productivity went up. And a few months later, the same consultants came in and did it all over again to analyze what's going on right now. And they asked the same question. What are you doing? And now they would answer, we produce this car X. So they were not talking about producing brakes, they were seeing them as part of the big whole producing brakes for this car. So they were actually thinking, now we produce this car, we are part of producing this car. And this is what I mean by collective awareness, collective consciousness. And the one main pillar, column, or factor for that is having transparency. So in order to be able to do that, you need transparency. And Scrum is actually based on transparency because it's based on empirical process control theory. So if you use Scrum, you by default have to implement transparency, so it helps you with this point. Okay. Scrum also creates an environment of psychological safety. Just here to see a little bit what's the difference between trust and psychological safety. So in terms of trust, it's the question, will you give others the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? This is called trust, I'm sorry. And psychological safety is the opposite. So will others give you the benefit of the doubt when you take a risk? Okay, so what we need is basically both. And Scrum values in the Scrum environment helps us to create and produce that. Now, last point of this model is focus. So in Scrum, we want to minimize work in progress. We want to focus on the goal. We want to minimize multitasking and distractions. And Scrum helps us with several elements. So first of all, Scrum works in iterations, as I told you before. And those iterations are called sprints, so which are basically, you can imagine like very small, very short cycled projects with a definite sprint goal. So the idea is, so during that short time period, we focus uniquely on getting this goal done. Getting this goal done. This obviously helps us to focus. In Scrum, we have also a product backlog, which is basically a list of the requirements that we need to create the whole product. But this product backlog is prioritized, it's ordered, and it has unique priorities. So the first item is #1 priority. The second item is #2 priority. So we don't have 3 or 4 #1 priorities. We have a completely ordered or completely prioritized product backlog. And that helps us to focus, because the first thing we do is priority #1. And only when we finish that, we start priority #2. So Scrum helps us actually with extreme focus. So putting it back together or showing that model again. So what we need is purpose, and we want to focus on that purpose. And we want trust in the team, but trust with psychological safety, not only trust. We want a cross-functional team that operates with shared consciousness. Okay. Now, we're talking about remote teams right now. And the number one issue that remote teams have is usually communication, which is also one of the or probably is the number one issue of teams that are co-located. But co-location can cover up for the problems we usually have with communication. I think Reinhardsen once said co-location is the closest thing to fairy dust. Why? Because if you have the person next to you and your communication is not really good, but the simple fact of having that person next to you helps you to increase communication saturation, and that helps you obviously to work better together. Now, the best way of communicating, and doesn't matter if you're remote or not, is still two people at the whiteboard. So it's still face-to-face, it's still co-located. But then when you're remote, well, there's a problem. You can't be co-located because you're remote. And now with the COVID crisis, there are lots more of us that work remote. So let's look at the second most effective way of communicating, which is two people on a video conference. Okay, this is a chart from Alistair Coburn, one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. So this is two people at a video conference. And the thing here is video. Okay, why? So communication has three parts. It has the verbal part, the paraverbal part, and the non-verbal part. So the verbal part is basically the words you use. So if that's the only thing that matters, you can also do WhatsApp or email, because it's the same words. What you say, what you write, that doesn't matter. The thing is that the verbal part of communication is less than 60% of the information you send. So if that's the only thing you do, you usually lose a lot of information. So if you look at this chart, it also tells you the worst way of communicating, which is sending large documents. Okay, so if you want to make sure you lose information, just send large documents. Now, what happened with voice and video? So the voice part is the paraverbal part. So it depends on, for example, the modulation or the volume of the voice you use that can change the message you send. But also the non-verbal part, your mimic, your gestures are important. So the way you look, are you smiling? Are you looking angry? Are you using your hands? All this sends information. So for example, in our company, it is an obligation now to use video conference during all team meetings. Why? Because we don't want to lose information. And we found, like, we saw obviously some decline in velocity at the beginning when we moved from co-location to virtual, but we're back up. And since we use video conference on all our communications, I think we are pretty close to communication saturation than we were before. And I'm pretty sure many of you know those meetings where there's no video, so everybody is only connected by voice. Nobody is actually knowing who's actually talking. Many people don't pay attention and doing other stuff. Only when they say Fabian, then you are like, oh, what? Wait, it's my turn now. So this would be one of the number one recommendations. If all the other stuff is a little bit too complex right now, maybe start just with having video calls instead of only audio calls. Now, bringing this back, I already mentioned the Agile Manifesto, very brief. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with that. That is, the manifesto was signed in 2001 in Snowbird, Utah by 17 individuals. And one of the things they did was defining 4 values. And the number one value they defined was individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Okay. So now that we work remote, there's lots of discussions around tools, and many of the purest people that stick to the Agile Manifesto say, no, it's individuals, interactions over processes and tools, but they interpret that in a probably suboptimal way, because they say, well, we don't want to use processes and tools. It's all about individuals and interactions. Well, the problem is if you're on a remote team, you cannot interact if you don't use a tool. For example, there'll be no way that we are talking to each other right now if we wouldn't use Zoom or Google or even the phone. We would have to need some kind of a tool that we can talk to each other, because I'm in Bogota, Colombia right now, while you're probably in the US. Okay. So I think we should keep that in mind. And with that, I want to sum up. So during this situation, for many businesses, it will be necessary to change the business model. Now, Scrum can help you with that because it pushes digital transformation. It helps you to manage uncertainty in an uncertain environment, and it helps you to adapt very quickly to change. Third, teams work remotely. Many teams right now work remotely and probably will continue working remotely for a while. And with Scrum, you can actually create high performance remote teams. So with that, I would like to finish the talking part of this session and to stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, then let's take some questions.
Thank you, Fabian. Please feel free, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat window.
Okay, looks like we don't have questions.
No questions. Okay. All right. Well, did you have any additional thoughts, Fabian, or final comments that you'd like to make? Thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Well, I think the last slide showed it actually pretty clear what's my thought on that. So I believe we're in a very high certain environment. I think might get even worse in terms of uncertainty, at least for a while. And I think Scrum is one of the tools that can help you to navigate in this uncertainty. Probably the summary of all of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we were even commenting a little bit on that when we were, before everybody joined us, about how adaptable you have to be these days. And it truly is unprecedented times, that's for sure. Good. All right. Well, I think what I'd like to do with the last minute or so that we have, and if anyone thinks of additional questions, you can feel free to put those in the chat, but I would like to launch a brief poll, just a short retrospective for the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and launch that. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a moment to just answer 2 quick questions. And I'll leave that open for just a little bit longer. Okay, thank you so much for responding to the poll. And if we don't have anything else, I would like to thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon. And Fabian, thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to join us. And we'll let you guys all get back to work if you're working, or back to enjoying the rest of your day.
Hey, thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.